I'm Chris Hartwell, and welcome to The Heartbeat, the place where I talk about just a few of the things that make this little guy tick. Today, I'm going to be recapping Season 1 of Marvel's Daredevil. Join me, won't you? So, if the title and introduction did not make it obvious enough, this entire thing is one massive spoiler for the first season of Marvel's Daredevil, so proceed knowing that. With that said, let's jump on in, guys. The season opens with one of the most important days in Matt Murdock's life, that being when our hero sees his last. Ironically, the acting and heavy-handed writing also make it one of the cheesiest moments that we see. Fortunately, that really is a feeling I only experienced a couple other moments in this very solid 13-hour series. We then cut to an older Murdock confessing at a Catholic church, talking about his father, who is a professional boxer with a propensity to lose himself in the ring, to which his onlookers would say, those Murdock boys have the devil in them. And then, 6 minutes in, we see Daredevil in action, taking on a group of human traffickers. And though he triumphs, he too seems to lose himself to something dangerous and primal within. Is the devil within this man too? Well, as his name and the awesome opening credits would suggest, yes, he is. After the obligatory reference to the attack on New York, which happened in the first Avengers, we meet Foggy Nelson, Matt's endearing law partner. Greener than green, having just started practicing law, the duo are desperate to grow their practice, which Foggy is more than happy to do by representing the guilty. Fortunately for the more particular Matt, a woman named Karen Page, who seems to have been wrongly accused for stabbing her coworker to death, turns up in need of legal representation. Nelson and Murdock to the rescue. And I've got to say, I already really love the interplay between Matt and Foggy, just with the latter's constant commentary to his blind partner with things like, ooh, I think she vaguely shrugged. We'll go for it. As difficult as Karen's story may be for the average Joe, or average Foggy, to believe, due to his hypersenses which literally allow him to listen to her heart rate, Matt perceives that she's telling the truth. As they learn, Karen works at the financial department at Union Allied Construction, who are overseeing the government contracts for Hell's Kitchen's reconstruction. Uncovering a file that incriminated the massive corporation, she shared this information with a coworker over drinks, only to black out and come to with her friend's blood all over her hands. Next, we meet the players at the top of the criminal food chain. Leland in charge of the money, Vladimir and Anatoly in charge of distribution, Madame Gao in charge of production, Nobu in charge of protection, and James Wesley, who represents the mysterious man at the top. At her apartment, Karen is attacked yet again, but this time Daredevil is there to save the day, an act that will forever paint the masked vigilante as a hero in her eyes, and the pair of them decide to release the evidence that Karen has uncovered. And not having the money and needing to bring our core team together by the end of the TV pilot, Karen decides to volunteer her services to Nelson and Murdock. Episode 2 opens and we find Daredevil in a dumpster in pretty horrible shape. Fortunately, he is found by the nurse Claire Temple, who takes him into her house and patches him up. In flashback, we continue to get a sense of Matt's past with his down-and-out boxing father, who tends to lose more than he wins, which we discover is actually intentional. His fights are rigged, and little Matty does get wind of this and is devastated by it. And I've got to say, after the cheesy season opener, I was just really pleased how this relationship continued to develop in this episode. It was quiet, it was subtle, and it was genuine. Claire, too, is great for Matt. She really has a no-nonsense personality that I believed would accept Matt and what he does. Their relationship isn't cute or simple, though, as we see the pair of them together forced to interrogate a Russian mobster to discover where a kidnapped child has been taken. In flashback, Matt's father reclaims his soul, winning the fight he was supposed to lose against the famed Creel, but ultimately loses his life because of it. And then we flash forward to the fight of the series thus far. A beautifully brutal piece of choreography, both in the punches as well as the camera, which drifts up, down, and around the confined hallway, capturing perfectly the relentlessness of Daredevil. Like his father, the man can take a beating almost better than he can give one. And I just love the moment at the end of the fight scene. Right before Daredevil walks into that room where the kidnapped boy is being held, he pauses and lifts the mask off his own face as to not scare the child within, because it so perfectly captures his soul and his own desire to be reunited with his father. Episode 3 opens with a brutal bowling alley murder, where I'm sure you can guess what the murder weapon is. We're then introduced to Ben Urich, a reporter with a conscience who's spent his life printing the truth and paying the price for it. At Nelson and Murdoch, to keep the dynamic duo out of his employer's way, the enigmatic Wesley offers to put Matt and Foggy on retainer in exchange for their exceptional skills and discretion, with their first case being the bowling alley murder, which Matt surprisingly accepts, though of course with ulterior motives, those being to discover from Mr. Healy who hired him to commit the crime. While Urich struggles with an amoral boss and a hospital threatening to throw his wife out, Karen is taking heat from her past employer's union allied. Fortunately, fate pushes them together to provide the support and information that each need. Though Murdoch is unable to overcome a blackmailed jury and Healy is acquitted by the judicial system, he walks out to face the judgment of Daredevil, and our hero finally gets the name of the man on top, Wilson Fisk. Cut to that man who instills such fear into others, shopping for art, where he meets the beautiful, sophisticated Vanessa. And already we're shown a villain who's not some sort of robotic force of evil, but a man who experiences pain, loneliness, and longing. On to episode 4, and it's time to get to know the Russian brothers Vladimir and Anatoly, who are in charge of distribution here in Hell's Kitchen, and who Fisk isn't all that happy with, as their operation is being jeopardized by Daredevil. Desperate to do things without relying on Fisk, the Russians wake up Simeon, the man who Daredevil pushed off a roof. Because you know, a shot of epinephrine to the heart would definitely wake up a comatose man. Though, I suppose he does die moments later. But not before telling them about Claire, who Daredevil can't quite make it to before she's kidnapped. On his first date with Vanessa, something he clearly doesn't do very often, it also becomes clear that Fisk does have some sort of, warped though it is, genuine love for Hell's Kitchen, really desiring to make it a better place. And I just love this moment when Fisk introduces himself to Vanessa, and just the pause that he takes right before stating his name, because in so stating his name, something that he rarely, if ever, does, he demonstrates how important this woman already is to him. She's getting him to let his guard down, and she's getting him to care. Meanwhile, Daredevil discovers the Russians' headquarters just in time to save Claire, and lays such a beating on the criminals that Anatoly decides to go to Fisk to plead for his help. Unfortunately, Anatoly interrupts Fisk's dinner with Vanessa, which really doesn't end well for Anatoly, and in one of the most chilling scenes of the entire series, Fisk beats the Russian man to death, crushing his head in a car door repeatedly until there's no head left. And afterward, all Fisk can say is, "Tell Mr. Potter, I need a new suit." You don't embarrass Fisk in front of his women. Ever. Period. Episode 5 opens with Matt explaining to Claire how he perceives the world. As he explains it, a world on fire. And the pair kiss. Things are sure to get less peachy for our hero, though, as Vladimir learns of Anatoly's death, the evidence now pointing to Daredevil as responsible. And to make things worse for Vladimir, Fisk is suggesting to his associates that they now divide the Russians' business among them. Back at Nelson and Murdoch, we're introduced to Mrs. Cardenas, a kindly old woman in need of representation against her fraudulent apartment owner, Mr. Tully, who is trying to displace his tenants in order to put up new condominiums. At the police station, Matt overhears a Russian prisoner in the midst of police interrogation give up Wilson Fisk's name, which leads to Detective Blake and Detective Hoffman killing the man. Daredevil doesn't let this slide, however, cornering Blake and discovering a series of mysterious addresses in the detective's phone. Meanwhile, to connect with Mr. Tully's legal representation, Foggy and Karen go to Lehman and Zach, where they meet Marcy Stahl, one of the lawyers from the sleazy law firm and Foggy's ex-girlfriend. The day does improve for Foggy, though, as volunteering to help fix up Mrs. Cardenas' apartment turns into a cute first date for he and Karen, though the conversation does eventually turn to Matt, revealing who Karen actually has feelings for. On their second date, Wilson promises Vanessa that by his side is the safest place she could ever be. And I love the symbolism found in the fact that Vanessa doesn't just discard her gun, she actually gives it to Fisk, and in so doing demonstrates that she's placing all of her trust, and indeed her life, in this man's hands. Things aren't going so well in Murdoch's love life, though, as Claire breaks it off, unable to fall in love with a man who's constantly putting himself in harm's way. Having caught wind that Fisk was actually the culprit behind Anatoly's murder, the Russians prepare for war. Unfortunately, Fisk is one step ahead of them, and though Vladimir makes it out alive, suicide bombers take out the Russians all across the city, at every one of the mysterious addresses that Daredevil had discovered earlier. Equally unfortunate, right when Daredevil catches up with Vladimir, the cops arrive, and the episode ends. And I had to wait a whole 3 seconds to click to episode 6 to watch Daredevil beat up a whole bunch of cops and get he and Vladimir out of this predicament, which certainly doesn't look good for a hero, even if the officers were on Fisk's payroll. Daredevil takes Vladimir to a warehouse where he tries to convince the Russian that Fisk is behind everything that's happened, his brother's death, the bombings, and if he helps him, he can get the payback that he desires. One of the explosions having injured Mrs. Cardenas, Foggy and Karen take her to the hospital where Claire works, completely unaware that their friend would be calling her moments later to figure out how to stabilize the dying Vladimir. And surprise, surprise, her suggestion to cauterize a wound with a flare does produce some screams and does bring the cops. And now Daredevil has a hostage situation on his hands. Which is exactly what Fisk has been waiting for, a situation that can be exploited to smear Daredevil. And I so enjoy watching our hero up against that kind of power. He's not just brawn, this Mr. Fisk. He's a brain. And he knows exactly how to use that power to trap Daredevil. And Fisk and Daredevil finally make contact. You and I have a lot in common. I want to save this city, only on a scale that matters. I respect your conviction, but your part ends tonight. Fisk's sniper starts taking out cops, Detective Blake being one of the casualties. Right as the police storm the building though, Daredevil and Vladimir work together to escape through a storm drain in the warehouse's basement. And Vladimir finally opens up, giving Daredevil Leland's name and explaining that he's the accountant in charge of Fisk and all the other crime lords' money. Get to him, get to Fisk. Before taking on the dirty cops, Scarface style, Vladimir tells a disheartened Daredevil, "Animals do not stop fighting until one of them is dead." And so again, we're made to ask, will it ultimately come to that? On to episode 7, where we open with an intense scene of a man being pursued by a samurai sword-wielding blind man who's in search of something called the Black Sky, which he learns is being taken to New York. Flashback to Matt, now living in an orphanage, his senses abnormally and painfully heightened. Enter again our man of mystery, who finally explains in concrete terms exactly how Matt can sense all that he does. He's gifted. A special kind of gifted, in a way that few other people are. Yeah, it's a comic book. What do you expect? And this man of mystery, or Stick, as he calls himself, is here to teach Matt how to make the most of that gift. Teach him about the world around him and how to let it in. Instruct him how to survive. And to spout off enigmatic statements like, "You'll need skills for the war." Believing it to be some kind of weapon, Matt agrees to help Stick keep Black Sky off the streets, but only if Stick agrees not to kill anyone to do so. At the docks, Daredevil and Stick move in to take care of Black Sky, which turns out to be a child, who appears just as innocent as a young Matt, reaching out to and consequently being abandoned by this would-be surrogate father. Stick needed a soldier, not a son. And breaking his promise, Stick kills the Black Sky child, which of course leads to a fight between master and apprentice. The episode closes with Stick's associate cryptically inquiring after Murdoch, "Will he be ready when the doors open?" I really cannot wait to see what the heck that means in Season 2. With episode 8, it's time to focus on Fisk. A man who in one sense has it all, but in another has nothing, and he hides from this by ritualistically ordering every part of his life, right down to those cufflinks. Even so, we get a glimpse of how he really sees himself, as the reflection that stares back at him isn't a composed, powerful man, but a frightened, bloodied child. As potentially cheesy as this mirror gag is, I really found it both effective and cinematic, especially just in the subtlety of Fisk's performance. Angered and offended that Fisk failed to protect the extremely rare Black Sky, Nobu asks Fisk if he'd like to renegotiate the terms of their agreement. Walking away from the encounter, Wesley is ready to put Nobu in his place, but Fisk chooses caution. Flashback to the man who taught Fisk how to be cautious, Bill Fisk, a loudmouth, abusive, wannabe politician who imparts to his son ideas like, "This city, it's everything. All you gotta do is put your mind to it and make it happen." As well as the importance of fighting back against those who would try to put you down and keep you afraid. Someone else who would be happy to put Fisk down is Detective Blake, who's just woken up in the hospital. Fisk's solution? Convince Blake's old partner Hoffman to finish the job. Unfortunately, Hoffman considers Blake more than a partner. He's a friend who he's known for nearly 35 years. And how does Fisk respond? "How much are each of those years worth to you? In round figures." And what makes Fisk such a great villain is it pained him to ask that question. You can just see it on his face. So Hoffman goes to the hospital with nothing more than a meatball sandwich in hand. A meatball sandwich with a lethal needle inside. Fortunately, Daredevil arrives just in time to pull just a little more information out of Blake. Unfortunately, he's unable to do so without also appearing to be responsible for his murder. We briefly meet Fisk's tailor, Mr. Potter, who seems to specialize in lightweight body armor. I wonder if he could make something in red. And then Madame Gao pays Fisk a visit, pointing out how sloppy and emotional our villain has become. And man, do you feel just the humanity of this guy, and how childish are his attempts to hold things together, oftentimes leading to these eruptions. The first and likely most impactful of those eruptions being the day that, in defense of his mother, he decided to pick up the hammer and beat his father to death, and in so doing, took up much more than his father's cufflinks. Knowing just how vulnerable Fisk is right now, Wesley brings him Vanessa, to whom Fisk confesses his dark past. Daredevil pressures Uric to print what he's learned from Blake, convinced that all they need to do is drag Fisk into the light and the city will tear him apart. But Fisk beats them to it, aiming to pull Daredevil into the light instead, to have him torn apart. It's now Matt who loses control. In episode 9, though Nobu is angered at Fisk for not yet delivering to him a specific block of Hell's Kitchen, both men do, however, agree upon two things. 1, the man in black needs to go, and 2, playing to his emotions will be the key to drawing him out. Wanting to better understand his enemy, Matt goes to visit his woman, which actually leads to a chance encounter with the villain himself. And it was great to see Matt really rattled by Fisk's just genuine love for the city, and the man's determination to do right by it. Which pushes Matt back to Father Lantom, who counsels him that judgment and vengeance are best left to God, especially when murder is not in one's heart. But the father's advice is nearly forgotten when Fisk reveals the emotional button that he's found to push, which will draw Daredevil out. Mrs. Cardenas, pulling Daredevil into conflict with arguably his most worthy opponent yet, the deadly assassin, Nobu, who we also learn at one time was acquainted with Daredevil's old mentor, Stick. After getting the snot slashed out of him, Daredevil finally triumphs over his adversary, only to have his true enemy arrive and thank him for his services. As angry as he is, Daredevil is far too wounded to go toe-to-toe with our main villain. But of course, after he's beaten Murdoch to a bloody pulp and has him prostrate before him, Fisk still hesitates long enough for our hero to escape. A thoroughly intoxicated Foggy shows up at Matt's apartment in need of his friend's encouragement and support. But Matt's just returned from his most recent battle, undeniably defeated and undeniably Daredevil. And really what the show did next with these two characters, and especially how Foggy responded to his friend's deception, I thought to be one of its best moves all season long, because it really allowed me to believe in their relationship and just how much it meant to both men. In episode 10, to make us really feel the sting of Matt's betrayal, we flash back to the partners' first encounter in college, which very quickly develops into a Maverick and Goose type connection where both men resolve to work together someday, opening Nelson and Murdoch, attorneys at law. Before Uric can throw in the towel to care for his ailing wife, Karen convinces him to first visit a nursing home with her. A nursing home where a one Marlene Fisk now resides. And though her memory is obviously slipping, Mrs. Fisk is still able to confess how her son killed her late husband. A son for whom things are about to go really south when at a fundraiser, someone poisons the champagne and Vanessa is one of the casualties. In episode 11, Karen goes to Matt trying to pry out of him what's actually going on between he and his friend, while Foggy wakes up in bed with Marcy. Yeah, I think he's hit rock bottom. Claire returns briefly to patch Matt up and encourage him to invest in some body armor. Returning again to Father Lantom, Matt is given the final nudge to take on the full mantle of Daredevil as the father says, "Nothing drives people to the church faster than the thought of the devil snapping at their heels." Maybe that was God's plan all along, why he created him, allowed him to fall from grace, to become a symbol to be feared, a warning to us all. Though the actual final piece of the puzzle is the suit. As entertaining as the subsequent fight scene was between Daredevil and Mr. Potter, it was one of the few times this season I thought, is everyone on this show a martial arts expert? I mean, even the tailor? Promising to protect the ones he loves from Fisk, Daredevil convinces Mr. Potter to make him a suit. But not so much a suit as a symbol. And the big oh crap moment of this episode is when Wesley gets a phone call informing him who's been heckling Fisk's mother. And so he takes matters into his own hands and tracks down Karen. This actually is one of my favorite scenes of the entire series thus far. It just didn't pull any punches. It's terrifying, it's disturbing, and it forces one of these show's most upstanding characters to become a murderer because that's where the show needed to go. Just, wow. Episode 12. In shock, guilt-ridden, and terrified, Karen disposes of the evidence and attempts to scrub away what she's done. At the hospital, Vanessa wakes up, and Fisk attempts to tell her that she will soon be moved out of the country. Being the woman that she is, however, Vanessa calmly but firmly explains she's not going anywhere and has the utmost faith in Fisk's ability to protect her. The anger that's been building inside of Fisk is stoked all the more when he discovers Wesley's fate. And it's finally revealed that Leland and Gao have been teaming up against Fisk all along. Consequently, Gao decides the safest move is to return to her homeland, which, as she puts it, is a considerable distance further than China. And the episode ends with a beautifully touching moment between Matt and Karen, where our hero confesses that he can't take another step alone. Well, almost ends. Because first we need to watch Yurik, having just been convinced by Karen to print all they know about Fisk, discovering that very mob boss in his apartment, who has no other choice but to kill our intrepid reporter. Yeah, like I said before, this show just doesn't pull punches, and it's all the better, albeit painful, for it. In episode 13, we enter our finale, things having been made intensely personal for both our hero and our villain, making their inevitable collision all the more exciting. And Fisk finds out about Leland's deception and, in classic Fisk style, erupts, but not before learning that Leland has got an ace up his sleeve, Detective Hoffman, who, if Leland doesn't check in every 24 hours, will be dropped off at the feds to confess everything. Finally, understanding the necessity of their partnership, Foggy reteams with Matt, and the pair of them learn of Detective Hoffman as well. Even as this discovery is made from behind a desk, Foggy must still face the fact that Matt must now don the mask to complete the job. At the same time, Fisk has discovered the location as well, leading to an explosive collision, which Daredevil exits triumphant. Hoffman turns himself in, confessing names, dates, and every other criminal activity involving Wilson Fisk. And it works. Arrests are made, and the evil and corrupt are put behind bars. Time running out for Fisk, he hurries to propose to Vanessa right before he is taken away in handcuffs. Our heroes rejoice. But then, after resolving that he's not the Samaritan, or the priest, or the Levite, that he is the ill intent who set upon the traveler on a road that he should not have been on, Fisk makes his escape. But, of course, how else will Daredevil and Fisk get their much-needed round two? Before that fight bell rings, however, Daredevil pays Mr. Potter another visit to collect the suit and the symbol. And then we get Murdoch versus Fisk. Both men fighting for what would seem to be the same idea, the same city, but our hero being the one to walk away triumphant, separating Fisk, for now anyways, from his love. A masked vigilante has a new name, friends have opened a proper law office, Foggy is back together with Marcy, and there's something still haunting Karen. And Matt can hear it in her voice. Through it all, though, the city now has Daredevil to snap at its heels to keep it on the path of the righteous. And thus concludes Season 1 of Marvel's Daredevil. Thank you so much for joining me, guys. Really appreciate it. This was a longer video, and if you stuck it out to the end, good on you. Definitely comment below, though. Let me know what you thought of the season. Did you love it? Did you hate it? What worked for you? What didn't? What are you looking forward to in Daredevil Season 2? Comment below and let me know. Also, please do subscribe. I'm going to continue to review films and television on this channel, and I would love for you all to stay up to date on all of those things. But, for now, I'm Chris Hartwell. This is The Heartbeat. Thank you for joining me.